obey us and turn the whole body and using the rudder to steer the ship so it can be driven as we drive it through the winds and turn it about. And James talks about, in both cases, these are small objects that control large things. But then he goes down to say in verse 5 that the tongue also is a little member, and the tongue boasts great things, he says, and it's a little fire. In other words, indicating it may be little, but it can sure start a lot of stuff. In James 3. And then he says every kind of beast down in verse 7, of birds and beasts, separate things, and things in the sea. They're tamed. He said, and has been tamed by mankind. I still marvel when I go to Disney World, wonder how they can ride those dolphins like that. Got them tamed. He said, but in verse 8, the tongue can no man tame, and the reason he gave for it, the reason nobody can tame it is because it's an unruly evil. He says it is full of deadly poison. And then he says in verse 9, he explains why the tongue is full of deadly poison. He said, because we use that tongue to bless God as we do, oh Lord, our Father, help me in the whatever. And then we turn around and then do what? We curse men. So we use the tongue as a double sword. And then he said, out of the same mouth, you have blessings come out of the mouth, and also use the same mouth to curse. And he said, my brethren, these things ought not to be. And that's where we stopped. And he asked a question, and I said, well, I was going to ask the question last week, address the question that James addressed, but we had to quit. In verse 11, he said, does a fountain send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter water? We had fountains doing that. We sue some folks, wouldn't we? You imagine going to the store buying bottled water, and you pick up that bottle of water, and you open it and get the 16.9 ounces like my folks sometimes do, and you drink half of that bottle and it tastes so good. And you go back a half hour later, you drink that water and it tastes like salt. You'd have issues with that, wouldn't we? But we don't have problems with our tongue. But James says, will it send forth sweet water and bitter? Then he asked the question in verse 12. He said, can the fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries? What's a fig tree supposed to bear anyway? Figs. So if you want berries, you're not going to the fig tree looking for berries. He said either a vine, figs. What do you normally find on a vine? Grapes, right? So when I want grapes, I'm not going to the vine looking for figs. I'm not going to the fig tree, and vice versa. And then James says, so can no fountain yield both salt water and fresh. And it's a good thing James wrote this because some people go like, well, I know you could take a plant and you graft them, and they may be able to do two things. I had a brother-in-law who could graft peach trees. And one half of the peach tree would grow one kind of peach, and the other half of the peach tree would grow another kind of peach. But I never known them to graft vines. So James says, James is talking about the tongue. He says, so can no fountain yield both fresh and salt. And then he says, who is a wise man in verse 13? Who is the wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Who is it? Or who is the person? He said, let him show out of a good conversation his works, good what? Meekness or what? Wisdom. In other words, if you are a wise man, James basically says, use the term, well, he doesn't use the same term we do, but he says, we basically say, show and tell, or demonstrate what you are. You the wise man, demonstrate it. In good conduct with your works, and meekness of wisdom. Now, when you talk about meekness of wisdom, sometimes people get wisdom mixed up and they misunderstand it, but I want to make sure that we're on the same page when we talk about wisdom. Wisdom directs, but knowledge supposedly informs. When somebody learns something, you say, "Oh yeah, I got some knowledge." Okay, you got something you didn't know. That informs. But how you use that knowledge, I have been told, is that is a matter of wisdom. Now, of course, we know that we can get good knowledge sometimes and misuse it, and that's not good wisdom. My dad used to always talk to me about wisdom when I was growing up. I remember that vividly. Boy, use wisdom. Use wisdom. But notice where James says the source of, I'm getting ahead of myself. He says conversation with work, meekness, and wisdom. He said, but if you have sweet, what? If you have bitter envying, what does it mean to envy? What is envying? What? Jealousy, strife, things of this nature. You know, I get upset when Mike Strother come in one day and say, "Hello, Robert, how you doing?" I say, "I'm fine." Then I look at his tie and I go, the next time I ain't speaking to him no more. Because I'm mad because he got to the store and got it before I could buy it. What's that? That's silly jealousy and envying. James says, if you have envying, and keep in mind, talking to brethren, he said, where bitter envying, but that would be bitter. He talked about being bitter. He says, and strife, where? In your heart. In your heart. All thoughts, good and bad, begin in your what? In your H-E-A-R-T. That's where it begins. He said, so if you have it in your heart, he said, don't glory about it. Before he says, glory not. Is that in your Bible? And don't lie against the truth. Don't deny it. You can't deny it. He said, this wisdom comes from above. What? Oh, somebody's with me. Okay, lights, wake up. He said, this wisdom does not come from above, but it comes from where? Earth, or down below. He says, not only that, it's sensual, and it's also what? Demonic or devilish. This wisdom, says James. He said, because of where you have envying and strife, there's also what? Confusion. Anybody ever seen unity where there was envying and strife? People arguing about stuff and they just, wow, look, they're getting along, aren't they? No. He said, where there's envying and strife, there's confusion and a few what? A few what type of works? Is that in your Bible? Are you at verse 16? Every evil work. All right, I just want to make sure you brought your Bible and bring your own personal commentary. All right? He says, so it's every evil work. He says it does not come down from above, this kind of wisdom. In other words, it originates in earth. Now, excuse me. God did not teach us to be evil. You ever seen how many times folks say they claim to be godly, but they're so evil? Now, I'll give you a good example. Hang on to your seatbelts, my brethren. Hang on to your seatbelts. On a good rainy day, On a good rainy day, sometimes people would demonstrate that even in this building. Check your umbrellas. Oops. So he didn't go there, did he? Yes, he did. Because when it's raining hard and so forth, you know, sometimes people run through the door, just grab an umbrella and go. And get home and read the name over. No, it's not yours. Why you don't bring it back? Hello? You talk about just an umbrella. That's devilish. To take something that's not yours and won't return it. Now, am I right or wrong? Amen. Lights, walls. But James talks about devilish things. Devilish things didn't originate with God anyway. It originated with the devil, and the devil just passed it on. There's a text, and sometimes some of you can work on it. I don't plan on doing anything with it. And there's a thing I talk to people sometimes about, the devil's commentary. Y'all know the devil's got a commentary, don't you? You didn't know? Let me tell you where you can find his first writing. I divert for just a minute. Some of you read Genesis 2, right? When the devil came and talked to poor Eve and took advantage of her. And when God said, the day you eat of the tree, you shall surely die. And the devil gave his commentary and says what? You shall not surely die. That's the devil's commentary. And when God tells us how we ought to treat folks and how we ought to treat our brethren, and we say, well, you know, they ought to get over it. Well, like I was at one church somewhere several years ago, I won't call the name of the place. We get new people who would come in and we baptize them, and they start doing some stuff, and some of the older brethren say, well, look, they ought to recognize some of them were sisters too. We used to call them devilish sisters. We were here first. They ought to recognize that. Well, these people came in, they were trying to work and convert folks. You had some other people who were sitting on the bench doing nothing, and they just got upset. Just jealousy, strife. But that's the devil's work. I don't get it. I don't get upset with folks who can do things that I once used to do or won't do. All you got to do is get up and start doing it. But James says, he says, where there's envy and strife, there's confusion in every evil work. He says, verse 17, but the wisdom that is from above. How does he describe that wisdom? It's pure. And then it's what? Peaceable. And then it's what? Gentle. And it's easy to be entreated. Some of the translations might say easy to be approached. All right? Wisdom ought not to make a person so big-headed that you can't approach them about things. Sometimes when people teach things and somebody says, well, you know, you taught such and such a thing, I'd like to know, I'd like you to explain that, how you arrived at that. You questioning me? You don't like the way I teach, you ought to come teach. That's not wisdom. That's not easy to be approached. So what's going to happen the next time when you really have a question? You're going to find somebody else, aren't you? Or avoid that particular person. But see, the wisdom that is from above makes it easy to be approached. Several years ago, there was a man, he passed now, Brother Arthur Guest. He had a teacher's training class many years ago. And I remember one thing he said in that class. He said, boy, he said, I don't care how much you know. Don't ever be afraid to go back and recheck. He said, because all you do when you go back and recheck is just confirm what you already know. He said, or you find out whether or not you made a mistake. So, I'd always go back and check. I had somebody one time say to me, I'm coming. They say to me, so you know what? A man don't have to be baptized to be saved. I said, well, why do you say that? You say that, but there are other examples in the Bible that teach otherwise. Now, I could have said, you know what? Hush. I said, well, what do you have? What do you have to show? And when the person started going through it, I said, well, you know what? You got a time lapse here. I said, this happens before the cross, this happens after the cross. I said, you know what? We started talking about speed limits. I said, you know when the speed limit was 70 miles an hour, when they started having the gas shortage and so forth, they dropped the speed limits to 55? I said, so which one are you going to tell a person that you want to still drive 55 when the police stop you? No, I wouldn't do that. I said, okay, no further questions. But see, I made it easy for the person to be approached and ask about the particular thing rather than just take it and say, open your ear. So you didn't get it. Let me run it through, see if it comes out on the other side. Susan, did I see your hand?
You did, sir. I was just going to say this bitter envying and strife, would that be the same as like covetousness?
Well, it could be with covetousness because sometimes people do cover up things or try to hold things to themselves. I mean, like Jesus accused that man who asked him, said, tell my brother to share with me. He accused him of covetousness. And there was certainly some strife between them because one had more than the other and he wouldn't share. So it could be in the same category. All right? To the best of my knowledge. All right? So James says, is the one that comes from above is pure, is peaceable, it's what? Gentle, easy to be entreated, is full of what? Mercy. Why is it that we feel like when we get up on somebody, y'all know what I'm talking about, we get up on them, we get them down, we just need to pour it on. Why? We don't need to pour it on. Mercy. He said mercy. And what type of fruits? Without what? Without partiality and without hypocrisy. Now we talked about partiality and so forth, and James talks about that. And we said keep in mind he's talking to brethren. In 1 Corinthians, I want somebody to get me 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and verse 33. I wrote that in my notes for some reason. For
God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints.
In some of the churches.
All
the churches. So whenever you find where there is confusion, when James was writing to these brethren here, God's not the author. He's not the author of confusion, but of peace in all the churches of the saints. In Psalms 133, verse 1, David said, behold, how beautiful it is when brethren do what? Dwell together in what? In unity. In unity. And the Lord's Prayer emphasizes unity. Somebody said, wait a minute, I didn't read that. Well, what you've been reading is, and listening to folks, is the disciples' prayer. I'm going to tell you what the Lord's Prayer says. When Jesus began in John 17, he said, Father, glorify your Son. He looked up toward heaven and he began to pray. I'll get over in John 17. He began to pray. And then when he got down, acknowledging that Jesus is praying, and then in verse 20 through 23, what does he say? John 17, verse 20 through 23.
Do not pray for these alone, but also for those who will believe in me through their word.
Now, hold it right there. Jesus says, I'm praying. Is that right? But I'm not praying just for these alone. But for what? Everybody who would believe in me through their word. Read.
That they all may be one.
That they all might be two. That they might be several different groups. That's what the world's teaching. That it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what church you're a member of. as long as your heart is right. That's what they teach. But Jesus in his prayer says that we all might be one through the word which the apostles preached. Read, Mike.
As you, Father, are in me and I in you.
God and Jesus did not have separate words. Read.
That they also may be one in us.
They might be one in us. Read.
That the world may believe that you sent me.
Now listen, the reason why you have disputes going on right now a lot of times, and people have a hard time believing in Jesus, is because one person over here says one thing, another person over here says something else. One person over here says, you know what? The Lord never meant for you to be poor. And if you're poor, that means God doesn't love you. And somebody over here says, you know one thing, if you're rich, you're not supposed to have it. That means you've done something wrong. To both extremes. Jesus didn't say it, God didn't say it. And the apostles didn't preach it. What they preached was that our citizenship is where? In heaven. And what they preached were things that would point us toward heaven. And they also taught us not to get entangled on things that are in this life, because at some point we're going to take them with us when we go. What? Y'all don't believe that? Amen, lights. Did you finish, Mike? Read.
And the glory which you gave me I have given them, that they may be one, just as we are one.
The glory you've given me, I've given them, that they might be one, as you and I are one. No wonder Jesus could say later, it's not a wonder. He told them, if you reject me, you reject God, you reject him who sent me. So folks have to get it together. But anyways, I'm not going to belabor on that. Thank you, Mike. He says back in verse 17 of James 3, he says, full of mercy and good fruits, without impartiality and without hypocrisy. He said, and the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that what? Of them that make peace. Talking about the fruit of righteousness. Now, before we leave chapter 3, I had a note that I made about the kind of God's position about the tongue, and then we'll be moving to chapter 4. I want somebody to get me Leviticus 19:16, Proverbs 11:13, Proverbs 16:28, Proverbs 25:23, and Proverbs 21:23. Now, one person get me Leviticus 19:16, another person get me Proverbs 11:13, another person can get me Proverbs 16:28, and then somebody else can get me Proverbs 25:23, and then Gene Stroud, I want you to get me Proverbs 21:23. All right? We'll do it that way. We talk about God's position on the way we use our tongue. Leviticus 19:16, how does it read?
You shall not go about as a talebearer among your people, nor shall you take a stand against the life of your neighbor.
Now, God never wants us to be a talebearer against people. We already read that people, here earlier what James talked about, well, we bless God and then we condemn man who God has created. All right, Proverbs 11:13, how does it read?
A talebearer reveals secrets.
A talebearer reveals secrets.
But he who is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter.
Now, sometimes we have to learn to keep, let me reverse that. Sometimes we have to learn You may know all you tell, but you can't always tell all you know. My mom taught me that early, bless her heart, before I ever read it. And I used to tell people, say, listen, somebody said, why you won't tell me such and such a thing? I said, well, if I don't tell you, you won't have to forget it. You may know all you tell. You better know all you tell, but you don't have to tell all you know. Okay? I'm talking about God's position on using the tongue. Proverbs 16:28, how does it read? A perverse man sows strife. Oh my goodness. That sounds like gossip, doesn't it? Huh? Perverse man sows strife. I know when I was in school, high school, we had some folks that was always, we talk keeping up trouble, and always sowing stuff. And you know what? And I went to my 50th anniversary reunion, and some of those same folks hadn't outgrown it. I told them, you need to stop your mess. Who are you to tell me I need to stop my mess? I said, you're grown now. That's a child that happened 50 years ago, and you still talking about that. That's no prophet. Some of the folks with us are already dead now. You're still talking. You need to get ready to leave here. But see, that's the kind of stuff going. Proverbs 25:23. Who's got it? Proverbs 25:23.
And a backbiting tongue and angry countenance.
Backbiting tongue. What's a backbiter? What do you think a backbiter is? What's a backbiter?
Someone who probably speaks angrily or bad or whatever towards someone to someone else instead of taking care of it
himself towards the person.
Now, I was waiting for you to get on that. You brought it the right way. They don't say it to your face. They say it where? Behind your back. Backbiting. We're talking about how God feels about this. I'm letting you read it. Then, Gene, I gave you the last one, Proverbs 21:23, right? Yes, sir.
Whoever guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul from troubles.
Oh, my goodness. Have you ever been confronted by somebody over something that you said? and you and listen, and you had to back up and apologize, or you lied. I didn't say it. Yes, you did. So and so told me you said it. But that's a bad position to be in. I can tell you how it feels being a kid, but I won't tell you the situation. But what you learn from that is what? To keep your mouth shut. Now, let's go back to James 8, chapter 3. And James says that the fruit of righteousness sown in peace in them that make peace. And then he starts in chapter 4. Then he goes to chapter 4. In chapter 4 he says, whence come, where do wars and fightings among you? Where do they come from? All right? Do they come, they come, and then he answers the question. He said, don't they, he asked a rhetorical question, don't they come from the lust, the war in your members? We might ask ourselves the question, when I have troubles and struggles within myself that are evil, that are not good, whose fault is it? Who created it? Huh? That's right. You can say nobody's fault but mine. Had a young man told a story one time about he had some conflict with a guy over some things that he should not have done. But he was the person who did it. So the conflict, he had to own up to the conflict. If he hadn't done it, he wouldn't have had the conflict. But James goes on to say, he says, these wars, these fightings among you. Now, we talk about brethren. Even of your own lust of war, he said, you lust, verse 2, and you don't have. You kill and desire to have, and you can't get it. You fight in war, and yet you have not because you do what? Because you don't ask. You don't ask. Reading this, and I read it over several times, I come to realize that a lot of people struggle inwardly, spiritually, over a lot of things because they created themselves. And a lot of things they ask people to ask God to help them overcome. They don't get over it because they won't let go. You have pride. How many times have somebody said to you, well, you know what, so-and-so, the problem you're having is with yourself, or you have a psychologist, somebody tell you that, and we learning this, a true religion does not befriend the world, and we go like, well, you know what, that may be my issue, but they just need to recognize who I am. Self. The source of wars and fights, we find through verses 1 to 3, is self. Because he says in verse 3, you ask and you don't receive because you ask what? Amiss, that you may consume it upon your lust or your pleasures. Yes, ma'am.
I cross-referenced concerning Proverbs that you gave, your 11:12. 11:13. You said, "Talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is a faithful spirit conceals the matter." And I was thinking, exactly what does that mean? So looking back, it said discretion is used so that he's slow to anger and overlook a transgression. And sometimes it's not, to me, it's not pride, but the hurt that is given, that is upon the person, and the need for healing to move forward. Not so much that they're being of pride, but there's healing still needed there.
Okay. Would you also agree that sometimes we can't heal because we don't want the medicine?
Maybe that's true, but sometimes it's true that the healing is needed because you do not wish it to be that, but it has happened.
Yeah, we agree.
And you cannot undo it for the person that has done it to you, and vice versa.
I concur.
Mm-hmm.
I concur.
Yeah.
A lot of things we do in life, we can't undo it.
And vice versa, yeah.
James teaches us a very, very, very powerful lesson about the tongue. A lot of things we say, and like I said, they taught me in school several years ago, once you put it out there, you can't take it back. It's out there. You can apologize all you want to, but there's nobody that can rewrite history. Everybody can make news, though, especially when it comes to the tongue. Thank you, ma'am. Now, he says, you lust, verse 2. You don't have it. You kill and desire to have, and you can't get it. You fight in war, yet you don't have it because you ask not. You ask and receive not because you ask amiss, that you may consume it on your lust. What's he mean by asking amiss? Who said that? Thank you very much. You're asking for the wrong motives. Is it possible for us to ask God for something for the wrong motives? I'm glad somebody said right. See, because most of us would say, that's for folks out yonder. Excuse my country language. But James is not addressing this letter to folks out yonder. He addressed this letter to B-R-E-T-H-R-E-N. Brethren. So what that says to me, and you can figure out what it says to you, watch yourself. Or as one guy says one time when they said something inappropriate, they said, watch your mouth. Same thing as watch your tongue. All right? We're making sense here? So, James goes on to say, and something we need to recognize too, that keep in mind, James already talked about the problem of controlling the tongue. Romans 7:21, Paul says, I find then a law that when I would do good, evil is present with me. And I used to tell people there's always an opportunity to do good or to do evil. You have to choose. All right, and you still do. So he says you ask amiss or you ask with evil motives. Then he goes down, he says, in verse 3, he said, you ask and receive not because you ask amiss, that you may consume it upon your what? On your own pleasures or your pleasures or your lust. But when you turn on the TV today, folks who claim to be preaching the gospel, there are many on there, not all, there are many on there always telling people, pray for riches. Pray that God will give you that BMW is coming. Pray that God will give you that Range Rover. You a child of his. Pray that he'll give it to you. So what? So I can drive it around and say, look at me. Can you see what I got? Yes, sir.
There's a verse in John I wondered about for a long time. It's John 16:23. In that day you will ask nothing of me. This is Jesus speaking. Truly, truly, I say to you, whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he will give it to you. What confused me was that Jesus, there are two words, ask is used twice in that verse. You'll ask nothing of me, but you'll ask of the Father. So I just said to myself, what's the difference between asking Jesus something and asking the Father something? There's actually two different words used there. The word where he says, you ask nothing of me, the word is eritao. And that carries the idea that the one asking realizes the one they are asking is on the same level they are. So it's like a friend asking a friend or next door neighbor asking a next door neighbor. When he says you ask the Father, the word's aiteo. And that carries the idea the one asking, this won't take long, the one asking realizes the one they are asking is on a higher level than they are. So it's like asking a king something. So when I realized that, I went through the entire New Testament, looked up every word ask to see what word was used. And in James chapter 4, I was certain, absolutely certain it had to be the friend word. But it's actually the king word. What that tells us is we can ask God in the right way, like asking a king, but we can ask for the wrong thing, and then we won't receive it.
You didn't say that.
That's what I said. Well, that's not what I said. It was what James said. But every time there's a promise that God will answer our prayers, it's always aiteo. It's never the friend word. It's always the king word. So we have to approach God like a king and not like our best friend or next door neighbor.
Now that's good teaching there, brother. Come on up here and take my place.
No.
That's what I like about Bible class. See, when in Bible class, you learn from listening, teaching, and being here. Amen, lights. Amen, lights. But see, we need to ask God, as James mentioned, and keep in mind, James is talking to brethren. He said they don't have it because you didn't ask. He said you didn't get it because you asked amiss that you may consume it on your own lust. And then in verse 14. Verse 4, he says, James called those people something low. I want you to hang on to your seatbelts. Notice what he says, verse 4. He said, you adulterers and adulterous sins. In other words, he made sure he included male and female. All right? He says, don't you know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? What does he mean by enmity? Enemy, a separation. Whosoever therefore shall be a friend of the world is a what? The enemy of God. Folks, we can't do everything the world does and expect to maintain fellowship with God. Just can't do it. When we approach God and ask for things, we have to ask the way God tells us to ask. When we ask for things from God, I can't ask for a new tie. I use that for example. Ask for a new tie if I want to ask for that just so I can go ahead and show Mike's brother, yeah, I can get one too. That's the wrong motive. You're talking brethren. James is going to get deeper, but that bell should have rang a minute ago, and I just don't want to. I got time? The clock is off? Okay, good. Y'all need to set that clock because I usually start by that clock. I could go on. But he says, don't you think that the scripture says in vain the spirit that dwells in us lust and envy? He said, but in verse 6, he gives more grace. Wherefore he said, God resists the what? Proud, but give grace to the what? And then in verse 7, he says, submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will what? See, the devil doesn't want to fight with you. You talk about, yeah, I was fighting with it. No. All you got to do is resist him. He'll let you alone. Because there's too many other easy prey out there for him to get. I think it was Peter 2:9 in my memory serves me. No, it's 1 Peter 5, verse 8 and 9. Read 1 Peter 5 and 8, 9 there for just a minute. First Peter chapter 5, verses 8 and 9.
Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour.
Listen, he's walking about like a roaring lion. They rang two bells at the same time. I'm going to finish this and I'm going to let it go. That's the first bell, the second bell, second bell. All right. He said, be vigilant because your adversary the devil is going about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. But get this. I'm going to leave you on this. He wants you and he wants me. But if we don't fight, he can move on to somebody else. He got you. But if you fight, he's still going to move on to somebody else. Because James says, resist the devil. And for lack of a better term, he'll leave you alone. What happened when Jesus resisted him? He left him alone, but he left him for a season, didn't he? Now, don't think he's going to leave you alone permanently. He'll be back. But I thank you so very much for coming. And remember, I told you I won't be here next week, Lord's willing. I'll be somewhere in another time zone. All right? Thank you so much for coming in your time. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your input.